When you think about what we're talking about, ko au te tai ao, ko te tai ao ko au, I am the environment and the environment is me. And so in that fist pump, you basically change over the baton to someone who doesn't have short red hair anymore, but she has the same attitude. To speak to Crazy and Ambitious, please welcome back Melanie Mark-Shadbolt, co-director of BioHeritage.
Kia ora, kia ora. I can try and explain that a wee bit, and it probably explains who I am. When I was a child, I loved Cyndi Lauper, and I wanted to have shaved hair, short and red, and my mum said no. So as an adult, one day I had a tantrum and shaved half my hair off, and I knew it would flip my mum out, and it did. And so then I dyed it red just to prove a point. And I'm not sure what point that was, other than that it came back to bite me in the ass, didn't it, Andrea? 10 years later. Anyway, my talk is now renamed Crazy and Ambitious, and that's because when we had the very first Crazy and Ambitious wānanga, I think in this very room, Andrea and I couldn't decide who was crazy and who was ambitious. I liked to think I was crazy and she was ambitious, but I think we may have switched around a bit now, and maybe she's crazy. But it was kind of a wee bit of the journey of the National Science Challenges, as it was very crazy, and we were very ambitious, as Andrea said. And she's right, I haven't written a talk yet, so I'm just going to wing it and see what happens. And the bonus is that I no longer work for the ministry, so I can say whatever I want. And I empowered myself this morning by putting on my We Will Be Heard t-shirt from Turo Island. So probably I will say something highly inappropriate, which represents me, not Daniel. He's very clear that I represent me, not him. Okay, ka pai. Last week I spoke at the Rauika Māngai conference, and I used a story about my journey through academia to kind of relay the journey of National Science Challenges. And I didn't do it because my journey through academia was very spectacular or very long, but rather it was a symptom of how Māori experience the system. So when I was reflecting on the story I might share with you today, one of the things I learned at the ministry was vulnerable leadership. I'm not very good at that. But as I tried again, was the reflection I had from the IMSIP actually was that we sometimes lose focus of the end of where we're going, and we experience the journey, and when we get to the end we kind of go, shit, how did that happen so quickly? What did I do? What was I trying to do? And it reminded me of when I was a child living in the Middle East. So here I am about 11 or 12 with my parents and my Omanian family living in another culture. And when I moved over there at the marriageable age of 11, I didn't once think about when I was coming home and what it would look like to return back to New Zealand. I never once thought about where we would go post-Oman and what would happen to me as a person and what this would mean. I focused on embedding myself in the culture, learning the reo, learning my Arabic, learning the tikanga, the kawa, how to operate in this new society. And for us as a family living there, we were in the deep south of Oman as well, literally just out of a civil war. It was very developing. The north was a bit more modern, and we were living in a country on the border of Yemen where they were still warring, and my father was a soldier, and my mother is blonde and blue-eyed, and my brothers are blonde and blue-eyed, as you can see, and so they were considered Western. She was considered a Western harlot. Their view of her was what they'd seen in movies, and my brother and my mother were spat at quite often and treated quite poorly. I wasn't, obviously, because look at me, I kind of blend in a bit. So it was an experience, and it was one where we immerse ourselves in it and we don't focus on what will happen later. And for me, that's very much how I think of the National Science Challenge. We have been so immersed in it for 10 years that at times we have lost sight of the end today. These days, the end of what would be these National Science Challenge experiments. We may have had a bit of naivety that it would carry on forever, that potentially we would stay in this kind of foreign place where everything was lovely, but we also had hope. We had hope that things would come, that the government might see the great structures we'd created, the amazing program and work we'd done, as Andrea has outlined, and that they may choose to reinvest. And today I think that some of us are very saddened, very disappointed about where we've got to, that there is no pathway forward, but that doesn't mean that we've lost sight of what national science challenges we're trying to achieve. And some challenges, arguably this challenge in particular, have done that very, very well, and other challenges are still on that journey. And as I talk more, you'll probably hear me say a number of times, I do genuinely believe that we needed another 5 years. I think, to answer Andrea's question, if we had had 5 more years, we would have had the breakthrough science that we were all expecting. We underestimated, and MB underestimated, how long it would take to set up national science challenges and to create a system that changed the way we all behaved in the science space. And so another 5 years would have been nice, but in the big scheme of things, another 5 years is not very much, because we come from a whakapapa in the science space that is built on colonialism. It's built on this colonial legacy of science being used as a weapon to spread across the world and take over societies and take their resources. And it feels like we're kind of reliving a wee bit of that at the moment, doesn't it? It feels like we're kind of in the past where we're trying to acquire land under the guise of something like conservation, but really it's just so we could probably mine it, not picking on anyone's whānau in particular. But we feel like we're kind of going backwards a wee bit. And it reminds me of some of the crap I've seen before. And crap's not a bad word, Daniel, I can say that one. It reminds me of some of the crap we've seen before. And this is excerpts from education policy and back in the day, back in 1800s. And this is what our system that we are all operating in thought of Māori, for example. They thought that we didn't need education, we couldn't be refined, we were good for manual labour. And that slowly changed, mostly. Maybe not with the 3-headed taniwha down the road. But in 2003, when bioprotection was establishing under its other name, that big long one, that kind of rhetoric came out again with that top quote where the Bioprotection Centre tried to establish, or did establish, a Māori theme, and people saw that as the end of the world. Pandora's box is open and we're going to let these Māori into the science space, and what will happen? And of course we love Te Maire Tau's slapback to that, but we see that rhetoric come up over and over again. And yes, do take photos because I'll go pretty quickly. We see that rhetoric come up over and over again. In fact, we saw it come up again in 2004 with the Aotearoa speech, where Māori were once again targeted because it's easy and it's convenient for seeking preferential treatment. And this is not to call out just the attacks on Māori, but rather the fact that we've all seen these attacks, whether it's on science or Māori or on the environment, over and over again. They are not foreign to us, and they are not new, and they're actually not very sophisticated. The problem with this speech, as you've heard me say before, if you've listened to me speak over the 10 years, is that it influenced this policy. This policy was going to be bigger and better than it ended up being, because it was really initially about accelerating Māori investment, or investment in Māori researchers. But because of the Aotearoa speech, it was reined in. The Labour government freaked out. They went round and cleaned up all of the race-based policy, and they watered them down. The problem with the VM policy for me, and why I've always argued it just needs to be binned, I know that won't happen, but it needs to be binned, is that it actually doesn't preference Māori. It preferences Māori knowledge and Māori resources, but not Māori. And I think the last measurement of VM investment, probably halfway through the science challenges, so maybe 5 years ago, and someone will correct me, stated that about 33% of the successful applicants in VM were Māori, but only 33%. So most of the VM money wasn't going to Māori. That's not a Māori policy, that's a science policy that uses mātauranga Māori, something that all of us understand is not appropriate anymore because of the work we've done in these challenges. That kind of view filtered through into the report by the TEU, the Tertiary Education Union, in 2016 on white streaming in universities. White streaming was about came as a response, and again, I'm not going to get in trouble hopefully, it came as a response to what was happening at a particular university I may or may not have been employed at the time, where everyone all of a sudden became a professor in things Māori because that was the only department that was going to grow. Had a new Vice-Chancellor, downsizing everyone except for the Māori department. So of course overnight everyone became a professor in Māori history so that they would maintain their jobs. The idea behind white streaming was that sometimes it's really convenient to take Māori spaces over, even if you're not Māori and you've never studied Māori history in your life. And of course there's this other comment here about Māori science from the National Business Review. We'll ignore some of those. But that all rolled into what happened with National Science Challenges. So this is a letter or an announcement that came on the back of a meeting that many people in this room had with Sir Peter Gluckman at Ngā Pai o Te Maramatanga when the challenges were being proposed and Māori hadn't been consulted. I think the wero that was thrown down, Ocean will probably correct me because you would have been there, was if you don't deal with this, we'll see you in the Waitangi Tribunal. So this looks like a claim to us. Māori had been actively excluded from the whole National Science Challenge creation initially. Now, isn't that amazing when you look at what we're doing now in this National Science Challenge, that in 2013, Māori researchers had to write to the government to remind them that we existed and they needed to include us in challenges. So you can see that the tension, as Andrea said, the fights that we were having in 2013 and 14 that Bruce was leading on our behalf. So this is kind of where we've gone. None of it's new. None of it is surprising. And this is a quote I often throw up. Again, take a photo if you want to use it. And I love this quote, not only because I think in 3 sentences it summarises how Indigenous people feel about conservation, but also because Mark Solomon has picked it up as well, and he uses it to talk about Ngāi Tahu's exclusion from their sites of significance, from their wāhi tapu and from their conservation estates. It basically says, look, everything's a land grab. You know, if we can't get hold of land legally, we'll just take it and call it conservation. And actually, Māori are so used to that. We're used to being dispossessed, or Indigenous people are, under the names of kings and queens and now under the name of conservation. So we had a real risk in this challenge that we could potentially have been seen as part of this system. We could have come to do great biodiversity research or great biosecurity research in places of significance like our national parks, but we could have been seen as contributing to this. We could have excluded Māori, we could have not worked with mana whenua, and we would have been no better than the colonial system or the colonisers of the day. So I've talked a bit about the negative stuff. My dad's a big Arnie fan. He said I had to use Arnold Schwarzenegger because this is kind of the last stand for me. What we're seeing in terms of the pushback right now down the road, as we see ministries losing people and funding. I think we're seeing something like over 1,000 jobs being cut in Wellington. There's 1,400 jobs and jobs for nature going. 45% of those jobs are kaitiaki, are Māori at place. We are seeing the loss of scientists and communities across 11 science challenges, cuts to CRIs, universities I think announced yesterday. This for me is a multi-pronged attack on not only Māori, but on the environment and on science. And for me, it's a multi-pronged attack because it is the dying days of the patriarchy and capitalism and neoliberalism. And when you are going out, you fight, and you fight hard. And I truly believe that the system itself would rather everything collapse than they get kicked out. So I do believe that there is some positives coming. I think that this is literally just the last stand, what we're feeling. And we will get through this and we will build a better world. Because we're like the X-Men, this is what I said to Dad, we don't do Arnie in our house. We're like Marvel and X-Men kind of stuff. So we're like the X-Men and we're going to take this out. And there's hope, because there's hope outside here if you want to go see the amazing exhibition with the treaty all blanked out. It's the best one in Te Papa at the moment. The kaimātua went out and got their photos with it. They had ropes in their bag. I was worried someone was going to get arrested. But there is hope, because our communities, our rangatahi are pushing back and they're challenging the system. So I've got some ideas and I'll run through them pretty quick, and take photos if anything inspires you, and most of it's just pictures because that's easier for me to then wing it, Andrea, as she knows me very well. So for the future, these are my final points for the challenge. 1, I think we need to find our tribe. Find the people who inspire, drive and sustain you. I forgot to bring my book up, but if you've read Tinga Ngata's book, she has a section in the back which talks about how do you know a narcissist, and it's really alluding to the narcissist colonial system. One of the things she says about this one is a narcissist will always try and isolate you. So find your tribe so you're not isolated. It will keep you sane in the long run. Create your whānau. Many of you have said over the last 2 days, this is your whānau, and you're feeling like, we're going through a separation, not going to see each other as much. Find your tribe, hold on to them. We can find ways to stay connected. I've found my tribe, some of them are here, some have passed on. Ride or die, we need people, so buddy up. It's going to get hard, but narcissists will try and gaslight you, Tina says that too, and they'll try and blame you. So you need your ride or die. I did travel to Europe with these two. We did get in trouble, so maybe be careful about who your ride or die is, because we were plotting out there, and apparently I'm not allowed to share what we're plotting because Daniel said it's naughty. So find people who have got your back. Collectivise. I'm a big believer right now that we need to collectivise our voices, and Puare and I have been talking about this quite a bit, about how we can in the Māori space, how we can tell our stories together and we can tell them better when we're together. I do have a view at the moment, it's the kind of he waka eke noa, we're either all going to survive the next 3 years or we're going to let some of our friends sink, and I don't think that morally any of us want to see our friends sink. So I do think that there's an onus on us to make sure we all survive the rough patch. So collectivise, tell our stories. Indigenous people are sexy at the moment. That was Jess Hutchins' drop yesterday. But she said, as a reminder, make sure that we don't steal the stories of others, because we don't want to end up like Air New Zealand or DOC, stealing people's stuff. So let's collectivise. Indigenous is sexy. That's what you've got to take from that. Indigenous was very sexy in France, apparently, when Tohi was on stage. Ditch the oldies. And I don't mean actual oldies, even though I did put some oldies in the pictures. I meant ditch the oldies as in the Crown. I don't think we need the RSNI system anymore. I think it needs us. We need to claim our space. Mātauranga is ours as Māori. Your science is yours as scientists. The knowledge that we create is ours. What's that saying? Success is the best revenge? I think that's what we need to do. Mātauranga is ours as Māori. I just want to point that out. This is a shout out to the Kaitahu whānau down south. This is Kaitahu Mātauranga in action. We don't need the Crown to fund this. We can do it ourselves. And again, just do it. Success comes from action, belief, shared values, and including people at place, particularly mana whenua. Here's some examples, we've heard them on the last 2 days, of success. I have to acknowledge the challenge, Bruce in particular, for being the first people who invested in Te Tira Whakamātaki, my baby, and the creation, an idea that Amanda and I had many, many years ago, and Bruce stumped up with the first bit of investment to get us going. He probably thought we were crazy, but he didn't. He just said he didn't. He didn't think I was too crazy. Kāpoi. And the top picture is just a hark back to Tami, because 5 years ago Tami had a vision as well about holding a kura reo tile, and everyone told him he was crazy. We went looking for funding for 5 years and we didn't get it. We did get it eventually, but that's because he's in DOC now. But if you believe, it will happen. And our people make stuff happen at the ground, and all of your projects are examples of how things get done at place when you have people who are passionate and when you believe in what you're doing. I did want to say quickly though, don't sell your soul. And even though Te Pūtahitanga is a report that we all talk about and we all love, that the Roika produced, I do have a little bit of a little nagging guilt left over, because the first report that we wrote as a collective, I don't know if you remember, those who wrote it with us, was actually way stauncher. It was hardcore, this is what the system has done to Māori. In fact, one of the reviewers, one of the chief science advisors, said at the time that when he read it, it made him cry. And he said he felt really sad and he had to read it again just to make sure what he had read was real. And we were told by the Prime Minister's chief science advisor at the time that we didn't want to make people cry and it was too sad and we needed to be kinder. And so we moderated it, and I regret that ever since. So don't sell your soul. Tell the story, even if it's hard to stomach. And embrace the crazy and messy. I've got this real love post-COVID for messy structures, and I think it was because I was in MFE at the time of COVID, where government loves linear, boring, straight stuff, eh? And what we find at place in communities and industry, we'll see this as well, is that on the ground things are messy, people overlap, we do the same things, our communities are, on top of each other as they're trying to clean up their waterways and protect their birds and remove cats and, whatever they're trying to do, get rid of hooligans on the motorbikes, what we do down at our river. That messy actually works at place. And if we want to address these wicked, complex problems like climate change, I actually think it's the messy that'll get us there. I don't think it's the straight, linear stuff that's happening here in Wellington that'll help us address key problems. So embrace the crazy and the messy. And that's crazy and messy, but we manage that. And finally, I think this is my final one, ignore the haters. Fight like a hammerhead shark. This is Aroha's call out before she left yesterday. Aroha said on reflection, years and years ago, she was at her university, they were closing down the Māori department that she was in. And she said she had two options. One was to fight to the death, and the other one was to save what she could and to, be calm, moderate. And she chose the dignified one, be calm, moderate, as she said, to save what she could, and she regrets it. She said, I've regretted it for 20 odd years because there was no way they were ever going to save it. She said they never had any intentions of saving that Māori department, and what she lost was an opportunity to fight and to ensure that the world knew how she felt at that time. And it was her reflection on all of us around the fast track bill as well, was that if we don't make submissions, if we don't put in writing how we feel about it, about any of these changes, then we're not in the history books of having stood against it. So the last call was to ignore the haters. There's lots of them here. I even put up a picture of my dad's just to show that, we can share the hate round. Or a cartoon of him. Ignore the haters, but fight. Fight to the end. And I know I'm running out of time, but that won't matter because I've just got a video to play very quickly. So, in saying all of that, there's a couple of things I want to leave you with. These are some definitions. Feel free to take photos about colonial systems and settler colonial systems and what they are. What's most important about that is actually this one. What we're seeing right now is the use of settler colonial emergency type methodologies, which is basically we see Indigenous peoples as a threat to our security and our safety in the country. We don't really. What we see is them resisting land grabs. And so we will treat environmentalists, scientists, Māori as a security threat to this country because they're stopping our economic growth, they're stopping our productivity, and they're stopping us from recovering from this imaginary budget crisis we have. We have to be smarter than what's happening down the road, and we have to acknowledge that this is just another land grab. We've already marched the length of the country to stop land grabs. We can do it again, because this is not just about grabbing Māori land, this is about grabbing everyone's land. And I want to close, well, I don't want to close, Matua Kevin's going to close by saying, actually, we already know what the solutions are to our biodiversity crisis. We just need to do the stuff. And Matua Kevin says it really eloquently here, and you're going to play that for me because I won't know how to do that. So kia ora whānau.
I think the main thing to me is that all the solutions to date haven't worked. and I remember your question earlier to us about, what's my thought of how we're tracking, and I said, well, I think we've gone backwards, and I suppose if I put it in context, I was thinking about 50 years ago, 1973. That's 50 years ago, yeah, and we could go on a horse out to Kaitoki, and you'd see 70 pigeons perched on taraire trees, all sitting there, and they're there for the taking. You might take two, ki te akau ki te tō kāinga or something like that. But and so it'll take us a lot of effort to. We didn't have all the technology we've got now, and yet we seem to have had it far better environmentally 50 years ago than we have today. And I'm mindful that, yes, the number of pests have increased, type of pests have increased. There's a lot more now coming in on ships and from other areas, and the rongo solution, I think, is just the last one. I think our body's healing is no much difference from our environment healing, and we've got to use the ways that we know have worked so far. And to me, what has worked in the past has been nature doing things ourselves, and and doing without the help of mankind, and that's why that the rahui is one of the best cures me waiho tuku e mā te wāhi ngaro e whakatika ake i ngā naue o te ao, just...
I'm going to leave you with this quote. This is from Matuahimi Waiwai, who was a big believer in the challenge before he passed away. And he said to us many years ago, if we want to know the answers to our biodiversity, biosecurity issues, then we just need to go home to the marae, because that is our hard drive, that is our institutional memory. And so this is his quote, kind of saying, if you want to know how to address, this was pre-COVID, we asked them, imagine the biggest biosecurity incursion ever, you can imagine, what would you do? And he said, go home to the whare, because that's where the answers are. And this is his quote. So kia ora tātou.
Kia ora e te rangatira, tēnei ka mihi ki a koe. Great references, so many that needed a screenshot. In terms of the movie, one I'd like to suggest is Wakanda. So this is where we go now, to where the technology is even better and Indigenous. Wakanda forever.